Okay, so in this Google Meet, we will be talking about Unit 3, Activity 6. And you'll notice that this is a review activity. So if you've been following along, you would have finished The Great Gatsby. You would have finished reading chapter 10, the last chapter, last week. Hopefully you will have finished the assignments for Unit 3 as well. The last assignment was last week related to your opinion about the ending of the book. If you haven't finished reading the novel, or if you haven't finished the Unit 3 assignments, this is a week for you to catch up and to review. And so I'll go through Unit 3, Activity 6. And then if anyone has any questions, or if you are watching this at a later time, if you need to get in touch with me with anything related to the book, send me an email, let me know, because the book is... there's some complications with the book. The book there's some things where you have to kind of read between the lines, and there are things that maybe you haven't understood in the book. So please don't be shy. Let me know if you have any book related questions. But here we go with Unit 3, Activity 6. All right. And so this is a review. It is the final activity of Unit 3. And as it says at the beginning here, coming into this week, you should have finished reading The Great Gatsby. Last week, chapters 9 and 10 were assigned. 8 and 9, I should say, not 9 and 10. The book has 9 chapters. And so hopefully you would have finished those 2 chapters. As it says here, if not, use this week as an opportunity to finish the book. This is a good opportunity this week, since there's no official assignment, to catch up. Okay. That said, if you are caught up and you are finished the book, I'm going to have some practice questions and some things you can start thinking about in terms of the final exam that you can work on. So what I've done in this activity is I've just reminded you of all of the topics in the activities that we've done. See if I can make this a little bigger. So we've got Unit 1 was an introduction, where I gave you a little biography on F. Scott Fitzgerald, and we talked a little bit about the Roaring Twenties. This book takes place in the 1920s, which was a time period where many people's lives changed drastically. People got telephones and cars and radios for the first time, and life started to change. Became more modern, as I like to say it. And so I would expect you to have a little background on F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author, and I would expect you to have a little background on the Roaring Twenties. Maybe on your final exam in the multiple choice or the fill in the blank, I would expect you to be able to answer a question or two about what I would call the historical context of the novel. I would expect you to know, for example, a little bit about F. Scott Fitzgerald's life and his wife, who was actually represented in the book by Daisy. And so if you haven't already, go back and take a look at the biography on the author in Activity 1. And take a little bit of a look at what life was like in the 1920s, because the book really explores that decade. In Activity 2, the title of the activity was Modernism. So I would expect you to know what I mean by modernism. So if you go back, there was a little video and there was a little note in Activity 2 about what modernism is. But to be honest with you, the most important thing that I would expect you to know from Activity 2 is figurative language. And so you've already done a little activity about figurative language in the book, and tried to find examples of figurative language in the book. But I will put figurative language on the final exam. So you will have to show me one more time that you understand figurative language, that you can identify a simile, a metaphor, a personification, a hyperbole, an alliteration, an allusion, an onomatopoeia. So we went through, I believe it was 7 different types of figurative language, and I would expect you to know them. So again, you can go back and you can review them in Activity 2. Activity 3 was all about the Great Gatsby characters. And so I would expect you to apply what we learned about character in Unit 2 to The Great Gatsby. So, for example, character archetypes or flat, round, static, dynamic. If you go back to Unit 3, Activity 3, I pose questions about archetypes and I give you some new archetypes like the femme fatale or the anti hero that we didn't discuss in Unit 2. So, I would expect you to maybe describe archetypes in the book, and I would possibly expect you to be able to tell me whether you think characters are flat, round, static, or dynamic. We've already talked about this a little bit with your Great Gatsby character assignment that you did this in Unit 3. Also, just in general, I would expect you to know the characters. Like on your final exam, I could have a multiple choice question or a fill in the blank question where I ask you to name a character in the novel. So, like one that pops up off the top of my head, which is kind of an obscure one, maybe, is name the piano playing man who lives with Great Gatsby. So what's the name of the character that lives with Great Gatsby in his house, right? And then I would expect you, his name is Klipspringer, and I would expect you to know that name, for example. And so I would expect you to know the characters of the novel. I would not ask you for a character that doesn't have any lines and is only mentioned once and never again. But I would expect, I mean, there are a fair number of characters in this book that show up in, say, your chapter questions. So I would expect you to go back and remember your characters. Symbolism, that was activity 4. And so we talked about how in the novel, F. Scott Fitzgerald uses locations like the different East Egg and West Egg and Valley of the Ashes. They all represent a different part of society or a different class within society. So they are symbolic of something more than themselves. We talked about how Fitzgerald describes the way that women behave and the way that they're dressed, and even the way that they sit. It all tries to symbolize how women are maybe don't have very much power in society in the 1920s and kind of are kind of stuck to the man that they're with, like the husband seems to have most of the power, for example. And that kind of, I think Fitzgerald shows that through symbolism. We talked about immorality through symbolism, and we talked about weather and seasons. That one I really like, weather and seasons. You'll notice whenever the weather or the seasons change in the book, it's a change. The entire mood of the book changes, right? So like if it rains in one of the chapters, that's symbolism to something. If it all of a sudden becomes sunny, that's symbolic, right? It means something has changed, right? And then, for example, in chapter 7, it's extremely hot and it's summertime. And then in chapter 8, all of a sudden it's autumn and it's no longer hot, it's cool. And there's a reason for that the season has changed. Of course, we've talked about colors, and you did an assignment on colors. So I probably wouldn't ask a big question about colors on your exam because you've already done an assignment with it. But I would expect you to have a basic understanding of how certain things in the book are symbolic of something, like that green light. It's not just a green light, and it's not green for no reason. Fitzgerald has made that light green because he wants it to symbolize something more than just a light. Unit 3, Activity 5 was about themes. So that was last week. And I presented to you some themes that are important in the book. I can tell you this, on your final exam, you will have to write a paragraph answer on at least one theme from the novel. And you can go back and look at the themes in Activity 5, and I'm going to give you a practice question. I'm going to take one of those themes and ask you a practice question later here in this activity so you can get a practice question for that. Last but not least, there should be a space here. I'll have to go in and make a space here. But the Great Gatsby chapter questions are probably your best study guide. Yes, you should go back and look at activity 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because there was important information in those activities. But if you've answered your chapter questions, and again, you didn't have to answer them in paragraph form or even sentence form. If you just made notes answering the paragraph, excuse me, if you just made notes answering the chapter questions, you should have a good study guide for the novel, because any character or location or event that I would ask about in the final exam is in the chapter questions. I wouldn't ask about a character that is never mentioned in the chapter questions, or I wouldn't ask about an event that happens in the book that is never mentioned in the chapter questions. So they are probably your best study guide if you go back and look at your answers to the chapter questions. You did not have to submit them. I am not grading your chapter question answers. Please do not send me your questions and say, correct them all for me, because they're for you. But if you had trouble with any of the chapter questions, if there's something confusing about the novel, send me a quick message with a question or two, or we can meet on Google Meet and I can talk a little bit about some of the chapter questions. But they are for you to show your understanding of the book and to make sure that you're paying attention. Again, I'm not going to correct them all or mark them. They're your study guide. Okay, hope that makes sense. Last but not least, in this activity, you have content questions, and I'll open them up, and you have a paragraph question. So if you open up the content questions, let's see if I can. What you've got here is 25 kind of random questions that just ask you, like the first one is about F. Scott Fitzgerald himself. The second one's about the 1920s, so about our introductory material. You've got a modernism question. You've got figurative language questions. And then you've got content questions like, which university in England did Gatsby briefly attend? Or what is Jay Gatsby's real name? So if you can go through these questions, most of them are just 1 or 2 word answers. So they would be like multiple choice or fill in the blank type questions. If you can go through these questions and you can answer them all kind of off the top of your head, then you should feel really good that you understood the book. Okay, that you were paying attention when you were reading and when you were answering your chapter questions. If you go through these 25 questions and 23 of them, you have no idea and you don't know what the question is even asking, well, then that's a sign that maybe you didn't read the book carefully, or that you didn't properly answer the chapter questions. So that's a sign that maybe you want to go back and relook at the book, or go back and relook at your chapter questions. So this is just kind of a guide. They're just random content questions, just to kind of give you a sense of whether you fully understood the book or not. Maybe 1 or 2 of these pops up on your final exam. They're random. They're not meant to be the exact questions necessarily that I would ask on the final exam, but they're just meant as practice to see if you have a full understanding of the book or not. So take a look at these this week if you get a chance. I would finish the book first. If you haven't finished reading the book, or if you haven't finished doing your chapter questions, I would do that first. But then if you are done the book and if you're done the chapter questions, then consider this a review. Consider this a practice for what you might need to know for a final exam. The second one that I gave you is a practice paragraph question. And so if I open that up, it says here, let's see if I can make this a little bigger. It says here that you should answer this question in about 10 to 12 sentences. You will have to write a paragraph answer for me on your final exam, just like you had to do on your midterm exam. And the final paragraph question is going to ask you about one of the themes in The Great Gatsby. And it's going to ask your opinion, and it's going to ask you to write approximately 10 to 12 sentences. So this is just an example. This is one of the themes from The Great Gatsby. If you go back and you look at Unit 3, Activity 5, it talks about how all the characters are obsessed with money and materialism. Maybe with one exception, but it seems like every character in the book is trying to make money, or trying to move up to the upper class, or to become richer in some way, right? So it says here, the characters in The Great Gatsby are obsessed with money and materialism. Explain how three different characters in the novel tried to make themselves rich. Use specific examples from the book to support your points. So again, this is just a practice paragraph. This is not the same paragraph that you would see on the final exam. But it is a good practice question, and you will have to answer a similar question about a Great Gatsby theme on your final exam. So I just wanted to give you this as a practice one. This is just the two reviews that I've given you here are for The Great Gatsby only, right? So only for Unit 3. So if you go through this activity with, your summary of activity 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, you go through your chapter questions. This is all an excellent review for Great Gatsby. And Great Gatsby will be very important on your final exam. It is the biggest unit that we have done. It was not covered on your midterm exam. So The Great Gatsby there will be a lot of material about The Great Gatsby on the final exam. That said, The Great Gatsby will not be the only topic on your final exam. You will have to show me that you can read and comprehend something on your final exam. And there will be some questions in the multiple choice and fill in the blank and short answer maybe that will be from other units, because the final exam will be what we call cumulative. I have to include something from each unit on your final exam. But we will have plenty of time. We still have one more unit 4, to do, and we will cover that over the next 2 weeks after this week. And so we will have plenty of time then to, we'll have more, we'll have at least 2 weeks to prepare for your final exam, and I will give you more practice questions and more explanation about what the final exam will be like. For this week, the focus is just on the novel, finishing the book if you haven't already, finishing the Unit 3 assignments if you haven't already finished and submitted them, and then going over the activities and the chapter questions and making sure that you are comfortable with the book. We'll go beyond that when we get into Unit 4. So with that said, I think I will end my Google Meet, my presentation for this week. If anyone does have any questions, please let me know, and we'll go from there. And hold on.